Welcome to those who are just now joining us. We're going to start in just a minute or two.
Give everyone a moment to trickle in.
Yeah. Thinking, why don't we go ahead and get started because we do have a lot of material to get through today and we want to be sure we leave a little time for questions at the end. So welcome. Thank you all for joining us. We're really excited to be back with another It's a Science webinar. I'm very fortunate to be joined today by Ashley from CAPS, who will be introducing herself in a moment. My name is Jennifer Taylor. I'm a therapist with the Alcohol and Drug Program at UCSB, and we're part of student health. Just a tiny bit about our program. We use a harm reduction approach with students. We offer a full range of services, so everything from prevention and education to counseling services to recovery support. And so this is just one of the many things that we do. And I've been with the Alcohol and Drug Program for just about 9 years. So I love working with students. I'm really excited to be here today. So I'll let Ashley introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Ashley Gilmore and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I work over at the Counseling and Psychological Services Building, also known as CAPS. I've been there for about 1 year now, almost a year exactly. And so it's been a wild ride for me because these are the turbulent times, the pandemic. And so I've been able to see that experience with students coming in, and that's reflecting on the amount of students that are coming into CAPS. So we're being highly utilized. But yeah, I'm grateful to be here and hopeful to share a lot of info with you.
Great. So as you all know, today's topic is finding inner calm in emotionally turbulent times. So as Ashley referenced, I mean, we've all been living through really unprecedented times with this pandemic. And I know for many of us, it's really brought up a range of emotions. So for a lot of us, certainly higher levels of stress and anxiety, and at times other really intense or difficult emotions. So our goal today is to provide a little bit of information concerning what we know about how college students in particular are being impacted, but really spend the bulk of our time talking about several skills that are very practical. They're skills that you can start using right away. I think that they're incredibly helpful. So I hope that you'll be able to take away something really tangible and useful from this. So a couple quick guidelines. So you all know that this will be recorded. I think you all had to check a box at the beginning saying that you were okay with that. But in case you miss anything, or just so you don't feel like you have to take a bunch of notes, you can certainly go back and watch the recording. This will be on our website as of early next week. You're also welcome to ask questions using the Q&A box. You can raise your hand if you have a question, or you're welcome to add a comment. And we will certainly try and make some time for questions at the end. These are learning outcomes. So we're hopeful that after this hour with us, you'll have a slightly better understanding of the body and brain's response to anxiety. We'll talk about the mental health impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on college students. As I said, we'll really dig into some concrete DBT skills for managing a whole range of emotions, especially anxiety. And we will touch on several resources that we think are really helpful, both on campus and just that you can find online, et cetera. So I wanted to actually start us off with a poll. We were very curious to hear how you in the audience have experienced any changes in terms of your stress and anxiety levels since before the pandemic. So hopefully you can choose one of these options. So let's go ahead and launch the poll. We'll give it just a moment. So if you can indicate whether your anxiety and stress levels have been much lower since before the pandemic, somewhat lower, about the same, somewhat higher, or much higher. Okay, I'll give another few seconds. All right. So hopefully everybody can see the results. So it's a little bit of a range, but most of you indicated certainly that your experience is that your stress levels are somewhat or much higher. And that's really consistent with what surveys have shown among college students across the US, and I suspect in other countries as well, that this pandemic has really created a number of really intense challenges for students. And Ashley and I are certainly seeing that in our clinical work with students. So we'll dig into that a bit more. Get rid of that. So this is a study that I wanted to highlight that came from Texas A&M University. They did a survey of over 2,000 students, and the results came out in September 2020. And I thought that these were pretty striking. So over 71% of students indicated that their anxiety and stress levels had increased during the pandemic. Over 38% showed a moderate to severe anxiety. over 48% indicated moderate to severe depression. And less than half of those surveyed felt able to adequately cope with the increased stress. So I think this is where DBT skills in particular, and the ones we'll be covering today, can help bolster, those tools that you have access to be able to manage the increase in stress and anxiety. This comes from that same study. So this kind of parses out some of the different areas in which people indicated that they were struggling or had been impacted by the pandemic. So I thought most notably, and again, I think Ashley and I both agree, we hear a lot of this from students, difficulty concentrating, especially with remote learning being set up the way it is, disruptions to sleeping patterns, certainly increased social isolation, a lot of concerns about academic performance, and then many students had disruptions and changes in their living environment, which were a challenge, especially right when things were shutting down. So along with that study, the researchers also interviewed almost 200 students, and these were identified as many of the core stressors that students were experiencing. So fear and worry about the health of themselves or loved ones, difficulty concentrating, sleep patterns being disrupted, fewer social interactions, and concerns about academic performance. So we have another poll. We were just curious again, those of you who are watching, we're curious about what your experiences have been, if these are concerns or stressors that you can identify with. So we have a quick poll, and you can choose, of course, more than one, because the researchers found was that students were, experiencing a number of these all at once. Take just a moment, please. Yeah, so I think these are really telling that these are really universally shared stressors right now that, almost all of us are experiencing to some degree or another, and certainly health and safety being at the top of the list. Right. So all that to say that finding healthy ways to cope is really, really important. Everybody has different ways that they're coping. Some of those may be especially effective and feeling really healthy. Other ones, maybe not quite as much. One thing that we sometimes see, because of course I work with the Alcohol and Drug Program, is that, students may turn more to substances as a way of coping, especially during times of intense stress or difficulty. And this bears out in the research too. So in 2018, researchers did an analysis using National College Health Assessment data. And there was a significant association between increased anxiety and alcohol use, and then similarly increases in depression and use of tobacco or nicotine and cannabis use. So, again, this is something that we certainly see, and you maybe ask yourself, well, what's the problem with that? And there are just a few that I did want to really highlight. Oftentimes, people do tend to turn to substances to self-medicate. So that may be a way to numb or decrease the stress, anxiety, sadness, loneliness that they feel, et cetera, or to cope with it, to feel a little bit better. Often, maybe feeling effective in the short term. But what often can happen is that it increases the underlying risk for mental health disorders and can make symptoms actually worse. And what we also see is this can become a primary coping mechanism for some people. So more and more they may turn to using substances in a way that becomes more negatively impactful of their lives in all sorts of different areas. So just something to think about and to take a look at in your own life, if this is something that you are tending to use, and hopefully we'll be able to, again, increase your access and use of some other ways to cope with things. And so I want to invite you to take a moment. We don't have a poll for this, but just to think about, how are you coping? What have been your go-to coping strategies during this time over this past year or so? And maybe how have they changed since the start of the pandemic? So have you picked up new coping strategies? Have those shifted over time? I think it's just a good opportunity to kind of take stock of where you're at with things. So I'm going to turn it over to Ashley to talk about the fight, flight, or freeze response.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. So before we kind of dive into the DBT skills, we thought it would be very helpful to show a video. And I know some of this terminology may seem familiar, but we really wanted to highlight our brain and our body's response to anxiety.
You know what anxiety feels like. We all do. Everyone experiences anxiety in some way or another. It's something that connects all of us together. Why we feel anxiety and what it really is, that may surprise you. Without anxiety, we'd all be in serious trouble. As soon as your brain senses you're in danger, a little piece of it, called the amygdala, kicks in. It gets your body ready to react. That could mean fight, run away, or shut down. It's called the fight, flight, or freeze response. This reaction goes back millions of years to our distant animal ancestors. Animals whose amygdalae were more sensitive to danger were more likely to stay alive and off the menu. Over millions of generations, this developed into the system we all know as anxiety. So you see, anxiety itself is not all bad. But when there's no immediate life or death threat, and your amygdala keeps telling your body that you're in danger, that's when anxiety becomes a problem. Your amygdala doesn't know the difference between getting eaten and public speaking or failing a test. Human society has only existed for a relatively short time. It's messy and complicated and confusing, and our amygdalae just haven't had time to catch up. So sometimes, when we're in uncomfortable situations, our brains misread the risk and overreact. Our hearts beat faster and we breathe heavily, pulling more oxygen into our bodies. The muscles in our arms and legs tense up and fill with blood. Our skin perspires to cool us down. This would all be great if we needed to fight or run, but instead, we just feel tense and sweaty. Sometimes our minds go blank and we feel like we can't move or talk. That would be great if we needed to hide. Instead, we just feel stuck. When things trigger our anxiety, sometimes we try to avoid them, like our ancestors avoiding a predator. But that can cause problems when those triggers are important parts of life, like going to school or meeting new people, things that won't just give up and go away. So how does knowing all this help? Well, it starts with remembering what's really going on. There's nothing physically wrong with you. It's just your amygdala trying to tell you it thinks you're in danger, even if it gets confused about how much danger you're really in. Understanding why we feel anxiety is an important step in learning to manage it.
Great. So how can DBT skills help here? So for starters, it's important to kind of know what DBT skills are. DBT stands for Dialectical Behavioral Therapy, and it is an evidence-based psychotherapy first developed to treat borderline personality disorder. However, through research and over time, it has been shown to be effective among individuals from diverse backgrounds and also diverse diagnoses, so anxiety, depression, substance use, etc. And so skills training groups in college settings have been shown to benefit students with a broad range of mental health concerns. And so that's kind of the skills training that Jen and I do. And it's not necessarily the full scope of DBT where you have the individual counseling and the consultations. And so today is going to feel a little bit similarly to that skills training. All right, so the focus of DBT is the dialectics of change and acceptance. And so for starters, I just wanted to let you guys know that a dialectic, what that means is two opposing ideas that can be true at the same time. So change feels very opposite from acceptance. However, when we consider them both together, we can create a new way of viewing a situation. And so the goal of DBT is to change the behaviors causing suffering in our lives while simultaneously accepting ourselves and our circumstances in this moment. So to dig a little deeper, DBT has 4 modules that they work in, and half of those are on the acceptance side and half of those are on the change side. And so if we start with acceptance, mindfulness is the first module that's generally taught, and that's being aware of the present moment without judgment, which we'll talk about today, as well as distress tolerance, getting through crisis situations without making things worse and accepting reality as it is. So this is kind of just not making things worse when you can't change a situation. Then if we kind of move over to the change side of things, emotion regulation, that's understanding and reducing vulnerability to emotions, changing unwanted emotions as well. And we won't have a lot of time, we won't have any time actually, to talk about interpersonal effectiveness skills today, but it's good to know that it is about, getting interpersonal objectives met, maintaining relationships, and increasing self-respect in relationships. So turn it over to Jen to talk about mindfulness.
Right. So in DBT, This module is called Core Mindfulness, and part of why it's called Core Mindfulness is because mindfulness is really such a foundation of so many of the skills in DBT. So it's really interrelated to all the other skills that we'll be talking about. So I know a lot of us have some understanding or varied experiences with mindfulness, but I'll give you a couple simple definitions. Here it says being aware of the present moment without judgment. Said another way, mindfulness is paying attention on purpose to what is happening right now. So if you stop to think about it, most of us spend a lot of our time during the day, not necessarily with our mind in the present moment, but actually thinking about things maybe that have happened in the past, or especially things that maybe we're anxious about, worried about, anticipating in the future. So we might be thinking about a conversation we had with a friend or partner or colleague early in the day. Or something that happened last weekend, or we might be thinking about an upcoming exam that we have, or a deadline, or even what we're going to be thinking about eating for dinner later tonight. So we spend a lot of the time, not so much in the present, but actually, kind of dwelling on one or the other. So a mindfulness practice is really the practice of bringing our full attention to that present moment. So again, DBT has a specific way of doing this. And what we teach is, kind of the what skills, or what are you actually doing when you're practicing mindfulness? And then how do you do it? How do you practice mindfulness when you are actually engaged in it? So the what skills are divided between 3 different ways. So observing, describing, or participating. The idea being you can't be doing all 3 at once. You can really be doing just one at a time. So when you're practicing mindfulness by just observing, you're just noticing, you're just using your senses to notice and experience your surroundings. So without labeling it, putting words on it, you're just maybe noticing the temperature of the breeze or the air on your skin, or you may be noticing the way your body feels sitting on the chair. Or you may just be experiencing, where there's tension in your body, or what it feels like to have a breath flow in or out. So it's just observing, and we really can only observe what we're noticing or experiencing with our 5 senses. So that's the first sort of part of practicing mindfulness, is just the observation, followed by the describe. So when we're describing, we're not only observing, but we're putting words onto what we're experiencing. So we're actually, talking about what it is we're noticing. So you might say, I hear a bird chirping outside, or I'm feeling tension in my stomach, or my hands feel cool, or the cat sitting next to me feels soft. So it's actually putting words into our experiences. And then next is participating fully in the present moment. So when we're really being mindful in life, it's actually being present in that moment. So it's not having a conversation with our friend while we're also kind of thinking about our list of things we need to get to. It's really being present in that conversation. Or you can even be practicing this while you're washing dishes or taking a shower, brushing your teeth. If you're practicing mindfulness, you're really just mindful of that one activity that you're engaged in that moment. So how do we do it? A big part of DBT is doing it without judgment. So we are human beings. We have judgments all the time. That's natural and normal and to be expected. That's how we make sense of our world around us. We're built to kind of have these judgments. But with DBT, we want to start to become more aware of those judgments, because what can happen is if we're having those judgments and we're not really aware that they're happening, they start to really impact how we feel about things. Then they can impact how we act and behave and handle certain situations. So it's really helpful, especially with mindfulness, to let go of judgments and to notice if they are popping up into our awareness and to see if we can let go of those. So if we're in the moment, we're practicing mindfulness and we're noticing my stomach is, feeling really tense, or my chest is feeling really intense. That's a bad feeling. I don't like that. I shouldn't be feeling that way. Those are some judgments that are starting to creep up, and we want to try and let go of that and just notice what it is that's happening. With mindfulness, we stay focused as best we can. We're also, again, all of us human. Our brains are tending to jump from one thought to the next all the time. And so it's unrealistic. And really the goal of mindfulness and DBT is not to achieve some sort of blank state of, not having any thoughts, but really just to become more aware of our thoughts and to become better adept at being able to, when they pop up, just sort of let it go, not let that thought stick or jump to another thought. So it's really just trying to stay mindful, stop trying to stay present. And doing what works best, especially when we're practicing mindfulness. It's not getting stuck on feeling like it should go a certain way or we should be doing it just so, but just being okay with, some days it's going to come more easily, other days it's not. How can I practice in a way that's going to work for me today? So this is another really important component of DBT, is this, this notion of operating from these different states of mind. So this, again, may be something that you've seen before, maybe this is brand new, but I'm going to go briefly over each state of mind and kind of what these are and why this is important. So starting with emotion mind, this is when we are running hot, when our emotions are really strong. We are really angry, we're really stressed out or anxious, we're really sad. And when our behaviors are driven by those feelings and we're really acting more on impulse and based on how we're feeling, this is when we're in emotion mind. Now, this isn't always a bad thing, but it can be a problem when it's the thing driving our behaviors. So if we lash out at our friend because we're having a bad day and we're just feeling irritable, that's us acting from emotion mind, and that can be damaging to the relationship. So it's not always helpful, and especially when our emotions are running really high, it's helpful to be aware that that's kind of the state of mind we're operating from. The rational mind, on the other hand, is sort of that cool, task-focused, fact-driven state of mind. So when we're doing a math problem or we're trying to plan a trip and we want to know how to get from A to B, or we're, again, even just like packing or doing anything that really just requires sort of, going down a list of tasks we need to do, this is us operating from our rational mind. Now, again, sometimes that's all that's needed. If you're working in a lab and you just sort of need to do the experiment, it's maybe not as important to be factoring in how we're feeling about things. But sometimes, especially when it comes to relationships or parts of our lives that are more complicated, trying to figure out what job we want to take, where we want to live, these things do become, it can be a problem if we're not also factoring in our emotional mind. So the wise mind is the integration of both. And generally speaking, this is the part of ourselves, we ideally want to sort of strive to operate from most of the time. So our wise mind is that really inner knowing, that sort of calm, still place, that sort of feeling of walking that middle path and feeling that sort of like this is, the best way to operate from. It's sort of taking into consideration the facts of the situation, how I feel, how the people around me feel, and really doing what works. So just to kind of give you another way to place this in context, when we're in emotion mind, we're a lot more likely to cope in unhealthy ways. So I invite you to think about if any of these ring true for you, especially during this past year of the pandemic where things have been stressful. We might have used substances in ways that we didn't before. We might have spent impulsively. Our appetite and eating behaviors may have changed. We may have, ignored the thing that's stressing us out. A lot of us may have procrastinated with social media, streaming services, all sorts of things. Sometimes we withdraw from our friends or from the people who care about us, or we spend too much time with those people at the exclusion of other things that need attending to in our life. Maybe we're sleeping too much or too little, and maybe we're taking things out on other people. So I have a video to show to kind of sum up the mindfulness component, and it just speaks to how this can be really useful in our lives. So we'll take a moment to watch this.
You may have heard this word mindfulness. It's become something of a buzz phrase of late. I'm going to give you one simple, serviceable definition, which is this. Mindfulness is the ability to know what's happening in your head at any given moment without getting carried away by it. Imagine how useful this could be. Just as an example, driving down the road and somebody cuts you off in traffic. How do you normally react? I think most of us, we normally react by having a thought, which is, I'm pissed. And then what happens next? You immediately, habitually, reflexively inhabit that thought. You actually become pissed. There's no buffer between the stimulus and your reaction. With just a little bit of mindfulness, in that same situation, you might notice my chest is buzzing, my ears are turning red, I'm having a starburst of self-righteous thoughts, I'm getting angry. But you don't necessarily have to act on it and chase that person down the road, screaming at them with your kids in the back of the car thinking you've gone nuts. Now, you might be thinking, don't I need to get angry sometimes? Aren't I justified? I would say yes, but probably not as much as you think. The proposition here is not that you should be rendered by mindfulness into some lifeless, non-judgmental blob. The proposition is that you should learn how to respond wisely to things that happen to you rather than just reacting blindly. And that, my friends, is a superpower. How do you get it? The way to get it is through meditation. I believe that meditation and mindfulness are the next big public health revolution. In the 1940s, if you told somebody you were going running, they would have said, "Who's chasing you?" But then what happened next? The scientists swooped in, they showed that physical exercise is really good for you, and now all of us do it, and if we don't, we feel guilty about it. And that's where I think we're headed with mindfulness and meditation. It's going to join the pantheon of no-brainers like brushing your teeth, eating well, and taking the meds your doctor prescribed for you. Let me just close by saying, mindfulness is not going to solve all of your problems. It's not going to render your life a nonstop parade of unicorns and rainbows. Nonetheless, this is a superpower, and one that is accessible by you immediately.
So hopefully that provides a little bit more context for everyone about how mindfulness can be helpful. And I just wanted to emphasize kind of that part about, mindfulness creating a little bit of space between the intensity of our emotions and, kind of how we act on them, how we manage them. So being mindful sometimes gives us that little bit of breathing room to sort of just notice how we're feeling and then proceed more mindfully, which we'll kind of get into and talk a little bit more about. All right, so I'm going to pass it on to Ashley. We were having a couple technical difficulties, but I think she's back, and she'll be talking about some distress tolerance skills.
All right, can you guys see me just in the nick of time? Okay, yeah. Talk about turbulent times. So basically, I just wanted to, we wanted to show a visual of kind of this thermometer, so to speak, just because a lot of the skills we'll be talking about today will depend on the intensity of the emotion that you're experiencing. So the first skill we'll talk about will kind of be when you're in that red zone, maybe panicked, frantic, and then some of the other skills will kind of go a little bit lower on that thermometer. So distress tolerance, again, highlighting this is skills that we use when we can't change the situation, but we're maybe emotionally distraught and we want to be able to accept and cope with that. So the first thing is the TIP skill, and I will also preface that DBT loves its acronyms. It's a way for people to remember them so that you can use them. And so the T stands for temperature. When we're upset, our bodies often feel hot, and so to counter this, we want to tip the temperature of our face with very cold water. This can also look like jumping in a cold shower, jumping into a pool, or squeezing an ice cube in your hand. The goal is to cool our bodies down physically and emotionally. And then next is I for intense exercise. Approximately 20 minutes, I would say at least 15 minutes. This can be manifested in a lot of ways too. This can be just sprinting down the street, going for a swim, or just doing jumping jacks, kind of in your space. And, the goal is to increase that oxygen flow because that helps decrease stress. And so also another bonus is that it's really hard to be upset when we're out of breath and when we're really tired. So again, the situation hasn't changed, but maybe we're feeling a little bit more calm. And then the P, these are two separate Ps. So we have the paced breathing, and this is all about gaining control of your breath. Steady breathing reduces our body's flight, fight, or freeze experience. And we'll do a little practice soon. And then also the paired muscle relaxation. This is about tensing our muscles voluntarily. When we tense them, we want to tense them for about 5 seconds. Like let's say you choose arms because you want to focus on your group of muscles. You would tense them for a few seconds and then release that, and the muscles will feel more relaxed than prior to when you tense them. So any of this could work, and we're going to try the box breathing. It says 10 minutes on there, but we're only going to do it for a minute. And so I want you guys to really think about finding that control, because it can feel a little uncomfortable at first when you kind of jump right into it. But yeah, let's practice this for a minute.
If you haven't checked out my first video, I explain a little bit about it, and that's a good place to start. Make sure when you breathe in, you're breathing in through the diaphragm and then filling up the lungs. And when you breathe out, do so through the nose. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, and then hold for 4. Let's start the exercise.
So again, we wanted to practice the box breathing just because, you know, it's a skill that you can use where you don't need anything else except for yourself. So you really can practice this at any time. And through practice, you will notice that it becomes easier to kind of have that flow with the box breathing. All right, so we're moving on to our next skill. I wanted to highlight that the tip skill would be used when you're maybe at your emotional breaking point and you can't really change the situation. Maybe now you're on that yellow on that thermometer. And this is where the accept skills come in. And I kind of just wanted to use an example because I love examples. And so I don't know if anyone's ever seen the show Friends, but there's a character named Monica and she dates a guy named Pete. And he calls her while she's out of town and he's like, hey, we need to talk. No, she doesn't know if it's a good talk or a bad talk. And this brings some sort of distress to her because she has to wait till he comes back into town. And so in this case, accepts would be really helpful for her. And so with that acronym again, the A stands for activity. That's just engaging in, it can be any activity, a hobby. These are just things that we want to do to kind of distract ourselves. So I would pick things that you like to do. And then next is contributing. This can be contributing to something or for yourself. You know, studies show that when we help others, we feel good about ourselves. And sometimes we're also engaging in an activity as well when we contribute. And then comparison. Compare yourself now to past times when you may have suffered even more. And I like to also note that I like to compare myself to when maybe I would have handled it a different way a year ago. And maybe this year I have learned some skills and I'm handling things in a better way. So with comparison, it's all about shifting your perspective. And then emotions. So this is where we want to invoke the opposite of emotion of what we're experiencing. So this can be listening to music, reading books. You know, if we want to invoke laughter, we might, you know, go on YouTube and look at like ugly puppies or something funny that's going to make us laugh. And then the P is for pushing away. So this is when you push away and leave it for a while mentally. So hypothetically, if I were Monica going through this situation, but, you know, I had this webinar, I couldn't really spend the hour stressing about, you know, what the news is. I have to kind of push that away for a moment. And what makes it easier is setting aside time to stress. I might say, you know what, I work all day. I'm going to push this to 7 o'clock after I eat dinner, and then I can try to work on maybe some problem solving. And then thoughts. It can feel very similar to emotions, except for we're trying to change our thoughts. So you really want to do things that are going to engage your mind. This can be counting to 10, which I don't like. I would say count backwards, -3, or do the alphabet backwards, something that's really going to take some brain power. Reading an engaging book. I like to think of Sudoku or crossword puzzles because it's really hard to think about other things when you're trying to count numbers on a Sudoku puzzle. And so thoughts really help to decrease the chances of maybe engaging in some self-destructive behaviors. And then lastly is sensations. This is engaging in all 5 of your senses. You know, the tip skill I talked about where we would use cold water. With sensations, you might take a warm bath instead. And so do things like listen to music, dance, squeeze a ball, things that are going to feel good. So yeah.
All right.
There you go.
Thank you, Ashley. So there is some crossover with the skills. I know Ashley just talked about sensations, but there is another skill under the distress tolerance category called self-soothing. And what I like about this is I think they're so accessible. And I bet a lot of you are already doing some version of this, maybe without even realizing it. But the idea is to be using all of our different senses and finding ways to soothe ourselves. So it's a way to ground ourselves in our physical environment. It's a way to do things that feel comforting to us. So, I mean, again, this just gives some examples, but I think some of my favorites, with sight, I think about, being out in nature. For me, that's really soothing. We know from research that provides a lot of benefits, but this could be anything. It could be creating better lighting. It could be lighting a candle and having some ambiance. It could be having, putting up some pictures or images that you really like or that, just feel really comforting to you. Sound, music, listening to things that you enjoy, maybe listening to nature sounds, maybe go outside and actually listening to nature in nature. With taste, this could be eating something that you enjoy, a little treat, a cup of tea, cup of coffee, anything that feels soothing and something that you enjoy. With touch, I think if you have a pet or an animal, that's a great one. Otherwise, again, this could be a warm bath. This could be a really soft blanket that you love. And with smell, if there's any sort of lotion or scented candle or smell of bread baking, I mean, it's really anything that, again, provides you that comfort. And it's a way to, engage with those. I mean, this is really kind of a mindfulness practice, that when we're really putting all our attention into that really soothing sensation, it does calm and de-escalates the intensity of the emotions that we're feeling. So another skill, and this is one of the harder ones I'd say, but also I think really important is radical acceptance. So it's called radical because, when we just accept something, it's maybe we're not fully accepting it or we're just sort of doing it casually. Radical acceptance really applies to situations, moments, times in our life, things that we really are really struggling with, things that we maybe wish weren't true or that are really painful. And so the practice is to really to accept reality as it is in that moment. It doesn't mean that you have to improve or like your situation, because there are going to be plenty of times in life, and I'm sure during this pandemic, where things have been really rough. Maybe you got a grade that was really disappointing, or maybe you got in a fight with somebody, or maybe you were in an environment that really didn't feel great and you were having a hard time with. Radical acceptance means, again, not liking that situation, but not being stuck in this place of pushing against it, of rejecting reality, of putting all our energy into, I wish this weren't the case. I just hate that I'm at this place. And it's instead putting that energy into either accepting or figuring out how to change and move forward and, adjust your reality if that's available to you. So the idea is that, pain in life is unavoidable. Things happen that are going to be painful, but the suffering over not accepting the situation, especially if it's one we can't change, is avoidable. And it's something that often we have to do over and over again. It's not as though, okay, I've radically accept the situation and I'm good to go. It may be 10 minutes later, an hour later, we're slipping back into that place of, I'm really, I just hate this, and sort of wanting to reject our situation. And it's doing it over and over again, if need be. So you can kind of imagine this like coming to a fork in the road, and really sort of choosing to sort of stay stuck in that place of suffering, or going on the path of, I'm accepting that this is what it is, that all the events of life have conspired to create where I'm at now. And all I can do is accept and then move forward and figure out where to go from here. And there's also this notion of willingness versus willfulness. So having a willingness to accept, even if it's hard and it's painful. So I invite you to kind of just think about if there has been a moment or a time. I mean, I know for myself, there's lots of times where I can think about some things that were really painful, and it's hard. It's hard to accept when things haven't turned out or aren't the way we want them to be. But there is something kind of comforting and relieving about accepting, okay, this is what it is. And where do I go from here? What can I do to take care of myself? So we wanted to pause because I know Ashley and I have been going through a lot of skills and just give us a chance to practice mindfulness again. So this is a really short body scan mindfulness practice. This comes from the Mindful Awareness Research Center at UCLA, the Mark Institute. I have the resource. I think it's going to be put in the chat box for some guided meditations that they offer on their website. But it's a great resource. So I invite you to try and be gentle with yourself. Don't judge yourself if your mind is wandering during this, but do your best to just gently bring it back, be present in the moment. Let's go ahead and practice.
Bringing your attention into your body. You can close your eyes if that's comfortable to you. You can notice your body seated, wherever you're seated, feeling the weight of your body on the chair, on the floor. You can take a few deep breaths. And as you take a deep breath, bring in more oxygen, enlivening the body. And as you exhale, have a sense of relaxing more deeply. You can notice your feet on the floor. Notice the sensations of your feet touching the floor, the weight and pressure, vibration, heat. You can notice your legs against the chair, pressure, pulsing, heaviness, lightness. Notice your back against the chair. Bring your attention into your stomach area. If your stomach is tense or tight, let it soften. Take a breath. Notice your hands. Are your hands tense or tight? See if you can allow them to soften. Notice your arms. Feel any sensations in your arms. Let your shoulders be soft. Notice your neck and throat. Let them be soft. Relax. Soften your jaw. Let your face and facial muscles be soft. Then notice your whole body present. Take one more breath. Be aware of your whole body as best you can. Take a breath. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes.
So part of why I chose one that's short is I like to illustrate that mindfulness doesn't have to take long. Sometimes people feel discouraged by this notion of needing to carve out a chunk of time to sit down and feel like they don't have time. But I really find that even in as little as a couple, 2-3 minutes, you can get some benefit. So, if you're somebody who likes guided meditation, there's a lot of content out there that we'll talk about later on that's accessible to you. All right, so shifting into our emotion regulation skills. So once again, emotion regulation includes understanding and reducing vulnerability to emotions and changing unwanted emotions. So let's start by talking about how do we even know what we're feeling? A lot of us go about our day not necessarily checking in with ourselves or really paying attention to how we're feeling. At some point, once that feeling becomes intense enough, we might become aware of it. But oftentimes we're not taking that moment to really take a step back and pause and look inward to what's going on. So again, this is incorporating mindfulness. But what we recommend is, and you can practice this throughout the day, just periodically stopping and just checking in with yourself. But step one is just observing. So kind of taking a step back, taking a moment, pausing to notice your feelings, thoughts, what sensations you're noticing in your body. Next is describing. So starting to put words to what you're experiencing. This might be emotion words. This may be actual physical sensations that you're noticing in your body. And really approaching your emotions with a non-judgmental stance. So it's easy to fall into the trap of sort of labeling emotions as good or bad. And I know we do talk about them as sort of wanted or unwanted, but emotions are just emotions. They all serve a purpose. And it's important that we're able to, to have those emotions. And I'll go into why these are important. But really just noticing, just without judging it as, oh, I wish I weren't feeling this way, or I shouldn't be feeling this way. Just noticing what is can be really powerful. So I'm not going to spend long on this, but if you're curious to look, at some of the more the emotion words, there's lots of really great lists online. And part of why I like to post this is it's easy to sort of just think in terms of the bigger, broader emotions. So happy, sad, angry, lonely, anxious. But there's a whole range of nuanced words that can more accurately pinpoint what it is we're feeling. And so the more adept we are at being able to kind of have access to this and describe our words more accurately, the more powerful that is. So what do emotions do for me? The first thing they do is they motivate us to action. So if we're feeling anxious and stressed, that's not always a bad thing. In fact, everybody experiences anxiety to varying degrees at different times, and if we didn't feel anxious or stressed, we might not necessarily be as good at studying and preparing for an exam that we're feeling kind of anxious about. So a lot of times that can trigger us or prompt us into action to do things to prepare or take care of things that need to be taken care of. For example, if you're feeling guilty, that's a good indication that maybe you've done something you feel bad about. Maybe you need to repair a relationship, or that you did something that kind of is contrary to your morals or values. Emotions also communicate to other people. So when we're really angry with somebody, that lets them know that maybe they've erred, that maybe, there's something that happened that's upsetting to us and that we need to work through. Or maybe if we come home and our partner, our roommate is seeing that we're, our shoulders are slumped, our tone of voice sounds kind of down, we're not looking at them, maybe they're able to sense that we're sad, and then they can offer us support. So emotions are really good at communicating. And sometimes we need to be careful about what we're communicating, but especially for the people around us to be able to respond in ways that are helpful. That's part of what emotions do for us. And they also communicate to ourselves. So in order to know what skills to use or how to handle a situation, what we need to do, we need to know what it is we're feeling. So if we're in emotion mind, but our emotions are all over the place, it's hard to get to wise mind without being able to first be clear on what it is that we're feeling. So I'm going to turn it over to Ashley to talk about the ABC Please skills, another acronym.
Yeah, so with this one, again, reducing our emotional vulnerability. I would say these are skills to implement into your daily routine. This helps us be less prone to emotion mind. And so I'm going to start with the ABC chunk very quickly. The A is for accumulating positive emotions or experiences. So do things that make you feel good. We want to look back at our day and be able to see those little moments where we did things for ourselves. And then building mastery. This is all about focusing your energy on, I would say, getting better at a skill or a hobby. So I would say, for example, maybe you've always wanted to learn piano, you might put some time and energy into that, and over time notice that you've increasingly gotten better in that hobby. And then the C is for cope ahead of time. This one's really important. This one is all about maybe coping for stressful situations ahead of time. So maybe you know in advance that you're going to be put in an uncomfortable situation. You might plan ahead as to like, okay, if this thing comes up or I'm anxious, I'm going to use the tip skill, or I'm going to push away at this moment and set aside time to do some deep breathing. So that's coping ahead of time and kind of rehearsing in your mind what you're going to do. And then the please skill, of course, the PL, treat physical illness. This is when you're sick, we feel very sluggish. We want to treat that physical illness because it can really impact our mood. And same with balanced eating. I mean, the term hangry has some merit to it. If you're not eating, we can be prone to emotion mind and maybe lashing out at others because we're hungry. And then avoid mood altering drugs. And this is talking about non-prescribed drugs. More often than not, they tend to dysregulate you. And I know Jen talked about it in the beginning, there can be more long-term effects. And so avoiding mood altering drugs, and I want to add in sometimes sugar and caffeine also counts. Sometimes caffeine is known to induce anxiety as well because it's a stimulant. And then balanced sleep, kind of synonymous with balanced eating. If we don't get enough sleep, we're very sluggish in the morning and we're unable to kind of complete our daily tasks and be as productive. And then getting exercise. This is different from kind of like the intense exercise you would do to kind of get through a moment. This is, again, putting this into your daily routine, and there's just tons of information on how exercise reduces stress and anxiety levels. So we added this kind of pleasant events list. Again, you can find all these lists online if you feel like it's really challenging to think about things to do. So we put some high energy ones and some low energy ones on there for you guys to glance at. So now we are going to jump right into a poll. This is just asking which of the please skills do you feel like you most need to work on? These can be very challenging to juggle at once. Just had a conversation about how being an adult is really hard because you have to think about so many things in life. Okay, so it's actually quite spread out, I would say. It looks like sleep and exercise, it's at that 30%. It looks like when people are sick, they're treating it, so that's great, but still just something for you guys to think about individually. And then we have the stop skill. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more differently. I would say use the stop skill as a way to use the other skills. Particularly, this is all about using mindfulness. And so again, you know, I love examples. I would say, let's say you have a conflict with a roommate about something and your instinct is to want to lash out and yell at them. You might use the stop skill to stop, take a step back, observe, and proceed mindfully. You might observe that if you lash out, that could create contention between the two of you, and you don't want that. So you might proceed mindfully by taking a breath, trying to get into that wise mind, and then maybe having a more calm conversation about what's bothering you instead of reacting to that emotion instantly.
All right, so I'm going to wrap things up and talk about some additional resources. We have some recommended mindfulness apps. There are so many mindfulness or meditation apps out there. These are just ones that we've used internally and really liked. So this will also be put in the chat box for those who are interested in making note of these. Also, these are some recommendations for websites that have free streaming meditations. So the meditation we did, as I said, came from the UCLA Mark Institute or Mark Center, but there's quite a few great resources. UCSB's Health and Wellness also offers several, I think multiple meditations weekly that people can join. I think a lot of times they're during the lunch hour, but you can look on their website to see. They also have a handful of pre-recorded guided meditations you can check out too. And I just wanted to put this on here because for those who maybe don't like guided meditations or don't necessarily want to look to their phone or computer to be able to access these, mindfulness doesn't necessarily require that at all. In fact, you can really incorporate it as you go about your day. So even just taking a moment to mindfully listen, just noticing the sounds around you, or just take a couple minutes to observe your breath. Or using your five senses to just take note of your environment. So there's a lot of ways that you can do this anywhere, essentially. If you're interested in learning more about these skills and you are a UCSB student, we invite you to check out our DBT skills workshops. These have been running every quarter since fall when things went remote. And we really delve into all these, the 4 different skills modules over the course of the quarter. So it's 4 weeks spread out every other week. There should be a link in the chat box if you're interested in signing up. We do require a pre-screen, but it's a really great group if you want to learn more. And just a plug for CAPS, hopefully all of you have some familiarity with CAPS, but it's a fantastic resource, and certainly it's a good starting place if you're needing some support or having a hard time. CAPS is also really knowledgeable about all the other resources on campus and can help connect you to support. And this finally brings us to the end. So we're happy to stay on and answer questions. I also, 2 things. One, I can come back to this slide, but we do have a survey that we would love if you would complete. It is really helpful for us to get feedback about this webinar and about topics you may be interested in the future for It's a Science. So it's very short, but please take just a minute or two to take the survey. And I also wanted to remind you again that this is recorded. So if there was any portion of this that you want to go back and watch, or there are any resources that you missed, as I said, probably by next week, you will be able to find this as well as all of our It's a Science recordings on the ADP website. So please, we encourage you to check that out. Certainly, if anybody has questions or wants to reach us with anything related to the webinar or the group that Ashley and I will be running in spring, please don't hesitate to get in touch. And I know everyone's time is precious, especially this time of the quarter. So thanks everyone for joining us today.